part of town, so thank you, first of all. And then secondly, I also wanted to say, si alguien necesita traducción, tenemos a la señorita Kenya Gómez que puede ofrecer traducción para el programa hoy. Está alzando la mano ahorita. Si tiene alguna pregunta, si no se siente confortable, podemos hablar con usted separado o puede traducir por usted. So if anyone would like to talk today, we're going to have a microphone for the audience as well as one for the panelists. We're going to try to spread it around for everyone. Just keep in mind that if we could come up and share your thoughts, it would be helpful. I'm just trying to make sure that the microphone gets safely to where you need to get to, mostly because we're trying to make sure that everyone can not trip on any sort of the hazards around here. So I apologize for that. But thank you so much for coming out. This is our third Policy at the River event. My name is Stephen Mejia. You probably got an email from me at some point, or from Friends of Los Angeles River. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager. This is our third event where we're trying to open up some of the conversations that our partners and advocates have around water, around the river, around parks and open space, to you at times when you can actually attend those meetings. And so this was, Policy at the River sort of began as one of those events to try to build more public participation. We were hosting them at the Frog Spot at first, and we wanted to see if we can change the venue. First of all, because this is a beautiful place and it's a fantastic community resource, and we want to introduce people to some of the resources that are available within our community. So that being said, today's conversation is, as I mentioned sort of in the description, we've been going through a lot of sort of changes around the river, particularly when it comes to funding for water infrastructure and parks and open space. And there's a lot of questions that surround that, as well as future efforts that are coming down the line that look to add resources to those efforts. And so our hope today was to bring a panel of folks who are very active in one form or another on these issues, on one facet or another, in order to talk a little bit more about that, add some context for what's coming down this year, and then hopefully open up the second half of the program just to have a dialogue with you all about those issues. What are the things that are being addressed? What things are not being addressed? What are the benefits? How can we participate, et cetera, et cetera. So without further ado, I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Keisha Sexton. I work at LA Neighborhood Land Trust. Can you hear me? Is it on?
Yes.
Okay, good. Should I speak louder? I have a loud voice. So my name is Keisha Sexton. I work at the LA Neighborhood Land Trust, which is an environmental justice organization. We work exclusively with low-income communities of color, really to address the lack of parks in our neighborhoods as a way to build healthier and stronger communities. My role today on the panel is really to share the stories of the residents that we work with, but also to share my own story about not having access to green spaces and how I feel resources are needed to build thriving communities.
My name is.
It works for him.
My name is Steve Harris. Sort of works.
Okay.
How's that? Hello. Okay. My name is Steve Harris. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for Senator Kevin De Leon. Kevin was the author of SB 5, which essentially has become Prop 68 on the ballot today, and was also the author of Assembly Bill 31, which set a lot of the framework for how park funds have been distributed through Prop 84, and will be distributed in some part in Prop 68. So,
Oh,
do you want to try it?
let me see.
We could also,
I got the magic. If not, I'll stand up and just share with you. This will probably be easier.
yeah.
So it's fine. I'll just.
No, we want to make sure everyone can hear.
Okay.
There you go.
So my name is Alfredo Gonzales. I'm the chairman of the Prop 68 campaign, the Yes on Prop 68 campaign that was referenced by Steve. My background is primarily in parks policy, land use, transportation. I've worked at SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments. I'm from Los Angeles. I've worked a lot in this policy space as it relates to the environment, on policy and funding issues, and I'm excited to have a conversation how opportunities that are in front of us are going to allow us to make big changes in the community.
My name is Bruce Resnick. I'll get up as well. I'm the executive director of Los Angeles Waterkeeper. And LA Waterkeeper is an environmental advocacy group. We've been around 25 years. We were originally known as Santa Monica Baykeeper, changed our name on our 20th anniversary to reflect the fact that we actually do work countywide. I think if you were probably going to describe LA Waterkeeper, we would be considered a watchdog group. So we're the ones beating up our state agencies and local agencies and businesses, trying to get them to comply with clean water laws, just force more sustainable water practices, make sure our ecosystems are back healthy. And we really do work countywide, from obviously the coastal areas, but all the tributaries, from the LA River, Dominguez Channel, San Gabriel, Santa Clara, and on, and look forward to talking about you guys are talking. I'm talking about the yet to be named, hopefully on the November 2018 ballot for a stormwater funding fee, and more on that in a little bit.
So, Alfredo, you forgot about TNCs. I'm Shona Ganguly. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. I'm the Associate Director for Advocacy and Campaigns. The Nature Conservancy is a science-based conservation organization. We're international. We're in about 70 countries in all 50 states in the US, and we've protected about 120 million acres worldwide and over 5,000 river miles. Our mission is to protect the lands and waters on which all life depends. I know it's really lofty. But we're here today to talk about what we can do locally and across the state and how you can get involved. And I think this is an important time to get engaged. And so hopefully we will help you to do that.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Can we please give a round of applause for the panelists? Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Shona's actually.
I'm a team player.
It's going to be a really familiar conversation, everyone. There's a presentation portion of it that's just to make sure that we're giving time to these experts to offer some of their wisdom or some of the experience that they've had. But we're hoping this isn't really an informal dialogue. So in sort of spirit of informality, I definitely need to mention that this Policy at the River is a program that is funded by REI and, hold on, they gave me the notes here. REI, Resources Legacy Funds, and TPL, Chester Public Land, and is sort of a member-supported event. So it would be remiss if, as a nonprofit, I'm sure everyone has heard sort of the NPR radio spring drive going on right now, but we do ask for, if you feel so inclined to become a member or to help support this event, it's very important for nonprofits to have that support from multiple places so that we're not depending on any one funding source to do that. And obviously, we're very thankful for our sponsors for helping us leverage that. So thank you so much. And now that plug is done, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the river context looks like from our perspective. So as you imagine, Friends of Los Angeles River has been active on these river issues for decades. And particularly very excited about, most recently, we've been able to become active on some of the local measures for parks funding, specifically Measure A, transportation funding through Measure M, and things like Prop 1 as well, that have brought different resources from different state funding sources, local funding sources, to try to address how the river is connected with some of these broader issues, where restoration of the river is not just for the sake of the half-mile corridor itself. It's connected to all these other issues around the county, around the city. And so our efforts have generated a couple of really interesting wins with Measure A, with the passage of Measure A, which I think we should celebrate, including some of the partners here. Yeah. So it passed, I'm not sure if every folks know, but it passed with about 75% of support from county voters, which is fantastic, at a time when they were saying, nothing because of the other priorities for the state. There's no way you could squeeze in parks into that, but we secured the funding for it. Voters agreed that this was an important investment, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about why a little bit later. But there was significant funding for parks and open space, and also protection of our wetlands, restoration of our habitat, and actually I have the notes here specifically. Just to give you a few stats, there was currently, and obviously these things are, some of these are in competitive grant programs, some of these are specified to go to high-need areas, but ultimately, 12.3 of Category 2 are going to save clean neighborhood parks, healthy communities, and urban greening programs. 12.3, these is millions, are going annually towards natural lands, open spaces, local beaches, water conservation, and watershed protection programs. And another category, Category 4, is going to regional recreational facilities, multi-use trails, and accessibility program. So as you can tell, the theme in that, the underlying theme is that our waterways, our natural spaces are all connected together, which is why we were really excited about supporting the river's place in that network of green infrastructure that supports our local communities and our local ecosystems as well. We also, as I mentioned before, the transportation measure, County Measure M, certainly had its sort of challenges in how much it could address for different communities. But one of the important elements that we saw was it was providing up to over $400 million for the completion of the LA River, I'm going to say LA Riverway. It's not just a bike path, it's more than one sort of user that uses that path, to create connectivity in the 51-mile corridor of the river, which is certainly not all the connectivity we need, but an important fundamental step in building accessibility and access for different communities. So we have been making some gains over time. We obviously have ongoing projects like G2, the Taylor Yard project right now, where the city is, took the investments, made some investments in a local park, and really is talking about how we develop space that from a railroad yard with all its challenges, bringing that up to the public, and at the same time finding a way to bring in the restoration and revitalization of river habitat that is incredibly and exceedingly rare, and something that's very difficult to find in cities organized as this. So with all that said, I think we're seeing a moment in time where there's a lot of support politically for these projects, especially those connected to the river. We're seeing a lot of support, and I think rightly so, for an understanding of how important water and parks are. And so hopefully this conversation will help us get into the nitty-gritty about how those things are connected, like I was saying, what's coming down the pike, and what is being addressed and what isn't being addressed. So starting off really quickly with, let me look at my notes, so sorry. Yes. So I was hoping, we could have Bruce and Steve. I think since you two have been particularly active on each of these measures individually, Steve in terms of Prop 68 and Bruce in terms of the county measure, if you can share, some thoughts about what is it, what are these funding measures, what are these bonds, how do they function, what are they trying to accomplish, what is the need, and hopefully, what can we use those to sort of build off of in the future?
I think I could do that.
Okay.
If you want, doesn't matter.
We'll start with you.
Okay, I'll start with water. And I'm gonna give the caveat, I usually am like overly transparent. It's been a very long week already, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep trying to wake myself up. So if I start nodding off, Shona will kick me.
I will.
So, she definitely will.
Well, while he's speaking, you should take out Twitter and tweet Our Water LA, because he's going to be talking a lot about that.
So I'm here to really talk about a coalition that's working to pass the stormwater funding measure, the Our Water LA coalition. About the measure itself, it's still in the works, that is a countywide stormwater fee. But I really thought it was important to kind of set the context so you understand what we're trying to change. Because I think most people, I mean, if you're here, you're probably a fairly sophisticated audience. You sort of know, we import a lot of our water and all that. But I don't think until people really look at it, they really understand how insane we deal with water in California. And so I'm going to use sort of the way that I actually think was best, even after I was a pretty experienced water advocate, that really kind of struck home with me, which was a way that Andy Lipkis of Tree People, sort of a visionary in the field here in LA. Don't tell him I said that, he's got a big enough ego, he doesn't need to hear that from me. But the way he talked about it, and he said, here's the way we've dealt with water in California, or in Southern California. We're in LA, we've paved paradise, right? We've spent billions and billions and tens of billions and hundreds of billions paving streets, paving roads, paving everything, taking away our pervious cover, the natural soils when it would rain that would infiltrate, take away our wetlands that serve, critical purpose of slowing water in storms, filtering water so it's cleaner, pulling out trees that serve many, many purposes, but one of them is flood control. They actually absorb a lot of water, the root system in a flood. So what was the problem when we paved everything? Flooding. That's what everybody was freaked out. If you're LA River folks, you care about that. So then what do we do? Oh my God, we've got flooding everywhere. Do we try to go back and sort of re-mimic nature? No. What we're gonna do is invest billions and tens of billions and hundreds of billions in stormwater systems. We're gonna put storm drains in all of our streets, and we're gonna concretize all of our waterways, and we're gonna get rid of what is literally the most precious resource we have as quickly as we can and dump it into the ocean. and say, oh great, that solved the flooding problem. Well, one problem, well, lots of problems, the fact we've got concretized, rivers and communities, but another problem, we're polluting. These become super highways of pollution. Everything you can imagine, from pet waste to herbicides and pesticides from our lawn, to copper and brakes from our cars, to the metals from our industrial facilities. All that urban slobber, that urban runoff, that all flows in and pollutes all of our waterways. So what do? We spend billions of dollars trying to do cleanup plans and restoration plans and all these other things. And then we realize, oh my God, now the fact that we're getting rid of all this water as quickly as possible, we don't have enough water here for all of our locals. So what are we going to do? We're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars bringing that water from the from the Bay Delta, through the State Water Project, through the aqueduct, through the Colorado River. I mean, think about that. It's absolutely insane. Now, has it worked? Well, I mean, it's grown LA, it's worked in that regard, but what's it left with? The old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, is it broke? Well, virtually every waterway in LA is impaired. It doesn't meet federal Clean Water Act standards, about 85% of assessed waterways. We have concretized waterways, concretized communities, all the things that leads with, and the communities you'll hear more about on the parks measure. On any given day, 100 million gallons a day of runoff. Every day, dry days, 100 million gallons a day of runoff is flowing into our waterways and ultimately out into the coast. Another 600 million gallons of sewage is going into our coast. The list goes on and on. The water sector, #1 user of electricity in the state of California. If you're going to combat climate change, you can't do it without combating water. And a lot of that is pumping water from north to south throughout the state. And honestly, I could go on and on of the impacts of devastating ecosystems throughout the region, throughout the state, throughout the western US. But I'll move on from there. That's the bad news. The good news is we just need a new paradigm. And it's really not that hard. Most people know. Reduce, reuse, recycle, restore. Reduce water waste, conservation and efficiency. We've done good with the drought, although we're backsliding, we can do a lot better. Reuse stormwater. That's what we're going to be talking about more in a minute. Recycle our wastewater so it's not going out into the ocean, and restore our contaminated groundwater that we have throughout the region. We know what we need to do to be sustainable in local water supply. Of all those options, they're all critical. Of all those options, capturing and reusing stormwater is the one that actually provides the most multiple benefits. It provides the most community investments and enhancements. It provides the best intersection of water quality and water supply. And that is why we are advocating for a funding measure for stormwater to go on the November 18 ballot. So this is something that the county is looking to put forward. It is going to be a tax, a parcel tax. And so the concept being, basically you should have to pay based on how much hardscape you have. If you have more hardscape, less water is infiltrating where it should be infiltrating, more of it is running off, polluting our waterways. So it's going to be based on a square footage, most likely for a homeowner. I can go into the exact rates of what it will be, but for a house, it's going to be about $73 a year is what they're estimating. Could be $5 more, $5 less, but a little less than $10 a month. Obviously for big parcels, industrial parcels, commercial parcels, big lots of land, they're going to see significant fees. And what is that going to go for? Well, it's going to raise about $300 million a year. And just so you know, just on the water quality side, cities estimate, and they're probably overestimating a little bit, so I always give the caveat, this isn't our estimate, that it's about $20 billion over the next 20 years to just clean up our water quality. So $300 million is a big chunk of that, but it's not the only chunk that we need. And what is it going to go? Well, this is where the Our Water LA Coalition, which is a coalition of environmental justice, social justice, labor, community-based organizations come in. We are advocating for a number of really core principles. One is this idea of sort of centralized, gray, concrete, sort of pump and dump approach to water isn't working. We want to see investments at the community level. We want to see what we're calling parcel-based and neighborhood scale. We want to convert homes over to natural landscapes where you can infiltrate. Businesses, commercial properties. We want to see more parks, which is where we have a lot of overlap. We want to see more green schools, green streets. And what we're really advocating for is that intersection, that multiple benefit intersection. So, kind of our perfect project is, building a new park which has recreational opportunities but also habitat that captures runoff from throughout the watershed, and if ideally is over a groundwater basin that can get treated and infiltrate directly. If it's not, it can capture water underground and be reused, providing all sorts of different community benefits. We also want to make sure that a good chunk of this money is spent in disadvantaged communities, that there's training opportunities so that all communities can compete, or technical assistance can compete for that funding, whether you're a small community, disadvantaged community. And we also want to make sure that it actually creates the next group of green jobs. So we want money for job training programs and labor and worker protections for all the projects built. So that's what we're advocating. It is definitely going to be challenging. People understand when you want to do a parks measure what parks are. They understand what transit is. They understand what housing is. Getting people to understand what stormwater capture and how that can green our communities, improve our water quality, improve our water supply, improve the health of our communities, improve habitat, how that all comes together. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. First of all, I just wanted to get a sense of my audience here. So these are the kinds of things we do when we're looking at statewide ballot propositions. So first of all, how many voters in this room, registered voters in this room? All right, excellent. How many of you are residents of the state of California? Excellent. So you are exactly my target audience. I'm here to talk about Prop 68. Now Alfredo will jump in with you, but with me on this. But I do want to give a little impetus. On this June's ballot, there's 5 propositions. 5 propositions. If you vote yes on all of them, I'm okay with that. But on the 5 propositions, these are propositions that had gone through a legislative process. That means they come with the recommendation of the legislature and the governor. In November, you'll see back to the voter initiatives, all the kind of mixture, some of them legislative, some voter initiative, but in June, it's a very clear, fine-tuned path of 5 propositions. Prop 68 is a derivative, it comes forward from Senate Bill number 5. Now, I want to give you a little background. So I'm Kevin DeLeon's Deputy Chief of Staff. In the past several years, he's been President Pro Tem of the Senate and has been a great advocate for climate action. And we want to deal with climate change, and we want to do everything from water to energy to parks. And parks is a particularly special space from him, having come from neighborhoods. This is our district. We have, of course, the great opportunities of the LA River, but for the most part, it's a working class immigrant district that struggled to build parks because of either contamination or lack of space or land use policies of the past, and so it was a constant struggle. Now, we've had park bonds on the ballot initiative at the state level for several decades now. They've come forward. Some might remember every single one of them, whether it's Proposition 40, Proposition 840, before that, 10 and 12. The initial park bonds, it was our assessment coming into the legislature, 10 years in the making, is that the beginning ones sort of tended to favor areas that were already park rich. And what I mean by that is protection sometimes of wildlife in an area that's already necessary, but it sort of skipped the urban park poverty concept. The coast is a park. It's a space there that we need to share and work together on. Oftentimes, there would be interesting and arcane, measures that would say that in order to build a park in your neighborhood, for example, an applying city would need a matching grant. Well, if you're in a working class area, where do you find a matching grant? Or where do you find sort of park-ready, shovel-ready projects? Those all became really challenging concepts through the years. And so I think as we were trying to get to the goal of not only hitting the conservation point, looking at the Sierras, looking at wildlife, looking at coastal, but also including in that where people are directly connected to urban space, and to understand that the first entrance into a park can lead to a lifetime love of parks throughout the state. So we felt that the benefit of a local park could be the connection eventually to a state park or a national park. And so AB 31 became our first real attempt to really reconfigure the system. AB 31 is a bill that Senator De Leon introduced when he was in the Assembly. It's really one of his first bills. And what we wanted to do is we started using needs assessments. We wanted to use data. We wanted to understand geography areas of what kind of acreage you had per people of park opportunity spaces. And so we wanted that to be part of the criteria, not just necessarily shovel ready or projects that had money behind them to get going and they were just looking for the last bits of funding. We were looking for needs. And AB 31 saw lots of great successes. I know we're going to be talking about the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust, and they had some fantastic parks that they put together with this effort. Right down the street, we see efforts that were created by AB 31. But what we found in AB 31, it was extremely popular and way oversubscribed. There was such a tremendous amount of demand to build parks throughout the state. And neighborhoods like the urban part of Los Angeles fared very well. The Central Valley fared very well because they met the criteria issues of lack of parks in neighborhoods of people and all the kinds of things that we put forward to use part of the scientific approach. Applications now were inserting their GPS coordinates and taking a map snapshot of what the accessibility and availability of parks were in those neighborhoods. And that was the first time state parks ever sort of evaluated things like that. So as we move forward, it's been almost a decade since we've had a proposition on the ballot at the state level that dealt with parks. Now, we did have one with water a few years back, and I think the great piece of the water, at least for the LA River since we're here with Volar, is to know that $100 million of that Prop 1 went to the Los Angeles River. 50 in the upper region and 50 in the lower region. We're very excited about the opportunities in the Los Angeles River. It's something that obviously connects many communities, and there's great opportunities that we found, and we've been able to not only take ideas in AB 31 and Prop 84, but also apply other types of funding sources to the opportunities here in the LA River because of its connections to wildlife areas, to, Stephen brought up the example of right down the street with G2. Well, the city essentially acquired the land, but the state came in and worked an easement arrangement with nearly $25 million now from the Wildlife Conservation Board that the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy and Mountains Recreation Authority are managing. So the good part is you can acquire the park, but what happens to the land when you acquire it? You've got to make it work for the people. And so I think we're really excited to see an organization like the Wildlife Conservation Board, which never really got into the urban park conversation, now be part of a partnership here with the City of Los Angeles, with the Conservancy, and with the Mountains Recreation Authority here. So wanted to get real quick to Prop 68. Prop 68 comes forward. 2/3 of the funding is going to go to basically build and maintain parks, some version of that. 1/3 of it will go to water, and I want to assure everybody in the room that none of that 1/3 of money will go to dams or any kind of controversial tunnels. I mean, Bruce is going to like that one. There's no tunnels.
Sorry, yeah, I think
there's no tunnels.
The audience that one. Can you repeat that last part?
So of the 1/3 of the $4.1 billion being proposed, okay, the monies will be going to cleaning of groundwater. They'll be going to some stormwater issues. But wanted to be clear, and this is fixing. Maintaining the systems that are there. This isn't going to build a brand new dam. This isn't going to build a new tunnel siphoning water from the north into the State Water Project. It has nothing to do with that. So this is all good, necessary, absolutely critical funding that water could use, flood control, drought issues that are also going to be funded because of Prop 68. 2/3 of it, like I said, go into park building, park maintenance. And they come in various pots. $725 million of that is going to be money that will build on the success of AB 31. And so we'll use park poverty and all those definitions that were laid out as criteria to do that. Now, I do want to point out a study, was it UCLA, John Christensen, UCLA's, I forget the Institute of the Environment and blah, 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 sustainability. Essentially, UCLA faculty member put together a study to assess the effectiveness of parks and are they getting to the intended audiences. And In the study, he had very, very positive reviews on the impact of AB 31. And so it almost sets the groundwork that we got park money to areas of poverty. That's essentially how we'd like to fund almost everything, right? We know the problem, let's figure out how to get the money there. We just figured out a good, solid mechanism, and we're now funding the mechanism again. AB 31, inside of Prop 84, had about 425 million, so we're going to be doubling, almost doubling that in terms of the impact opportunities here statewide. Now, there's a piece in the LA River, there's several pieces in the LA River that I think are very exciting. I know this is a river-dominant organization here.
I think we're going to have a lot of opportunities to talk about that, so if you could just...
Okay, so let me do this. Let me just list a couple of the opportunities so you can see, and then we'll get into the rest of the question and answer here. But there is some specific dedicated funding, $37.5 million, both to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy and the Rivers Mountains Conservancy. Each get that money dedicated to do work on the LA River. On top of that, we have some bridging works for $20 million of bridging work. We have some competitive grants that we think the LA River can compete extremely well on. So not only do we have dedicated funding, we have competitive grant opportunities. So I think the future with Prop 68 passing is very bright for the Los Angeles River.
Thank you so much. I think we're definitely going to have an opportunity to ask questions for clarification on what these things mean, how they're going to function, and we can get a little bit more detail about that. But I'm hoping, Keisha, you can help us sort of paint a picture of what this looks like on the ground.
Yes.
I think that's obviously something that's been an ongoing thing here. So
Yes, thank you. Are folks okay if I sit? Okay, good. Yeah, so actually there's a lot that I had talking points, but I'm going to scratch my talking points and I'm going to go with the flow, and I'm going to kind of feed off the presentations that I heard. And just starting with AB 31, actually one of the parks that we built where Senator Kevin De Leon actually had an opportunity to come out to was in Willowbrook. And the reason why that is so important for me to start there is because it tells a story of why resources are needed and why resources are needed for low-income communities of color. We built a park in Willowbrook, which was a site where trash was dumped, bodies, this probably was Melissa's project too, where bodies were dumped, and
Keisha, can I interview you?
Yes.
Has anybody been to Willowbrook?
No, oh, Melissa has.
So just, I think that
Yes,
would be
okay,
helpful to understand,
okay. Yes, so actually, Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust works in communities of color. We work in South Central LA, we work in East LA, as well as in Koreatown and Central LA and East San Fernando Valley. Willowbrook is a community in South LA, which is in the unincorporated areas. If you ever get an opportunity to go to any of the communities that we work in, you'll see a common theme. What's on every corner is a liquor store. You'll see vacant lots. You'll see you'll feel this feel that's different, where people really don't have access to resources. So Willowbrook is a community where most residents are living below the poverty line. Most residents are working more than one job, and really just trying to live day to day. In this specific community, there was a vacant lot that's been vacant for years. And it was a lot where people would dump trash. It was a lot where people where dead bodies were being dumped. And when we first went to the community and asked them, would they be interested in having a park, people said no. Because if you build a park, more crime will happen. And we don't want to have something there where it was a sad story for people, because again, bodies were dumped. And then as we started to talk with the community and have more of a dialogue about the benefits of park, the community came around. And they built this very nice nature park, which is the only nature park in Willowbrook, but they called it Faith and Hope. And the reason why is because that park, which was once a place that was an eyesore, became a place where that gave community hope. And it brought the community together, and it created a space for them to enjoy nature. So a lot of times the work that the Land Trust does is also about the environment, but it's really about the people. The people that we work with live in communities where there's not access to good resources like parks. There's not access to recreational programs. Many times residents would have to walk miles before they're able to get to a park. Myself, I grew up in the city of Compton, and I was a kid in the 90s, and the closest park to me was Lueders Park. And Lueders Park was not necessarily the park you wanted to go to because it was an unsafe space. So the park that we had to go to get access to recreational and get access to safe space was 3 miles from my home. And it was a place where my sisters and I, we fell in love. It actually was our Disneyland because it had this big slide, it had a pool, and most importantly, it had free lunch. And that park became our safe space to get away from things that were happening in our neighborhood. And similar to what I experienced not having access to safe spaces, our community experienced the same thing. And it wasn't until 6 years ago where I realized that not every community like mine or like Willowbrook didn't have this park poor or lived in a park poor area. 6 years ago, I moved to Mid-Wilshire. How many of you are familiar with Mid-Wilshire? Most of us, yay! So 6 years ago, I moved to Mid-Wilshire. And I knew that inequities existed among like our access to schools, our access to healthy food. But once I moved to Mid-Wilshire, it was clear to me that, hey, folks who have either a higher income or folks who don't look like me have more access to green spaces. I actually now live walking distance from 2 pocket-sized parks and 1 neighborhood park. And 6 years ago, before I even knew this work existed, I was like, wow, why is that? And then I was so blessed to find the LA Neighborhood Land Trust because it's an organization that's working on addressing those inequities. So one of the things we really appreciate about Prop 68 is its equity language. One thing I really appreciate about Measure A is its equity language. Of course, California is park poor. Of course, all of us need more money for parks, right? Yeah. We all need more money for parks. But there's some communities who have a higher need for parks. There's some communities where if they don't have that park, they don't have access to better resources. Not all of us can go to Disneyland. Not all of us can go to Knott's Berry Farm. So our parks become a place where we can play, where we can meet our neighbors, and where we can engage. One thing we also notice is our parks is a healing space. Many of our residents deal with many different traumas, whether or not I'm going to be able to pay my bill, whether or not ICE is going to come in and take my family away, whether or not I'm going to make it home safely without getting shot by the police. These are real issues that our residents deal with, and what we hear consistently, no matter if you're African American, Asian American, or Latino, that space becomes your safe space. It becomes a healing space. Our residents often share if they didn't have access to that park, they wouldn't have a place to even get healed. So we're in support of more resources for parks. We're in support of resources that are going to be distributed equitably. And what I mean by equity is that it's no longer, I talk to my city council member and I always say, don't give us resources in Mid-Wilshire. Give resources to South Central. Give resources to East LA because we already have. Well, I have healthy food. I have access to parks. That money needs to go elsewhere. So equity is really looking at where there is the most need and making sure that we're putting resources to support that need. And right now in low-income communities of color, there is a need. And what we really appreciate is that Prop 68, the stormwater, Measure A, it's going to get us closer to being responsive to that need. So I think I'll stop there. But definitely we're support Prop 68 because we're for equity and we really want to make sure communities with the most need have access. Oh, I'm sorry, I know the last point I wanted to tell, sorry. Because a lot of times folks feel like, well, if you give more resources to low-income communities of color, then it's just going to create more crime at these parks. And that's actually the complete opposite, because one of the things that happens is when you give folks resources, they get better opportunities. And when you involve people in the process in designing the space, they take ownership of it. So all the parks that we built, All the parks that we built, they're located in some rough areas, but they're safe. And they're actually community, feel like they own the space. And that's all about engaging communities, involving them in the process, and making sure that their voices are heard and making sure that we're delivering the resources that they need. Thank you.
So really quickly, Alfredo is going to help share some thoughts on. I think you can expand on it.
I'm gonna be real quick.
That's
I want to
fine.
get into the
Perfect.
question
I
and
think
answer.
we need to get into the Q&A.
So this is how we pay for the environment in California. Every 5 to 7 years, we put a bond on the statewide measure that pays for our water infrastructure, it pays for our parks, and it pays for our natural resources. And on June 5th, 9 weeks from now, we have an opportunity to cement our legacy in California, where we're going to defend ourselves and invest in our infrastructure and our environment. So this measure that we're talking about, I want to do a shout out to both Steve and the senator who worked tirelessly for a number of years. This measure is 3 years in the making, and it's striking a balance. Everyone gets something out of this measure, whether you live in the north or the south, the east, or the coastal, inland, urban, rural. There's something in there for you to care about. And it was it emphasizes equity. Never before has there ever been a funding measure that emphasizes and actually not only prioritizes, puts within the policy framework ceilings and thresholds of the investments and how they need to be made to ensure that disadvantaged communities get equity in these investments. There's no opposition to this, so I hope there's none in the audience either, because there's only a couple of people, and it's the people you would expect, which is the Taxpayers Association, that are not fond of anything. But even their argument against it is not that strong, where they start by saying, we do believe we need to invest in these things, just not this way. But we've proven over and over, and especially in Los Angeles County, in 1 year, 2 elections, we passed 3 funding measures. So we're hot, we're on fire right now. And also, this bond is smaller than previous bonds. It's trending down. So this is a $4 billion bond where we've been passing these bonds in this $7 billion range. The Mercury News just editorialized. We're meeting with all the editorial boards right now. We're having all, some are a little more challenging than others, but the San Jose Mercury editorial board said that voting yes on this measure would be the easiest decision to make on the June 5th ballot. And then the last thing I'll say, and it's been alluded to here, the LA River and LA really stands to benefit significantly. And one of the things that hasn't been referenced yet, but it's something to think about, because again, it was a very thoughtful measure, where they're putting people into the equation of these measures. Resources and revenues from this measure can be used for access programs to get people to public lands, which is something that's been identified as a real deficiency and a real problem. So those are just really unique elements of this measure that are really sort of cutting edge. The polling looks good, and we could talk about that in the Q&A as well. But this is how we do it in California, and I'm really proud and hoping you all join me on June 5th voting yes on the measure.
So, yeah, I'll be relatively quick too, because I like Q&A. And I hope that all of you, I don't see many phones out. That's what I was doing earlier. I was tweeting Bruce over here. We gotta, amplify these messages. I think my part in all of this right now is to say, what can you do, right? It's a little confusing. There's a lot of stuff going on. What can I do as a resident, as a voter? You can do a lot. And I know it feels like you can't. I know it feels like your vote doesn't matter, but it does. I think making sure you vote on June 5th is really, really important. Making sure you talk to your elected officials, you tell them these things are important to you. They do hear you. It matters. How many of you know who your city council person is, your assembly member, your senator, your congress member? How many of you know? Okay, that's not enough. You can go online and find your representatives. There's a Find Your Representative website. It's really easy. If you don't know how to do it, come to me after and I will help you find your person. Because they need to hear from you. They need to hear that the river's important, that parks are important, that climate adaptation and resilience are important. That these are things that we really need to do to have the kind of communities that we want. We don't want to pave over paradise again. We want smart, nature-based solutions that are equitable and really help us pave the way for our future and not pave. a nice path, a natural path. So I would just say there are so many ways to amplify your voice. Social media, so much of it is on social media now. Get on Twitter, get on Facebook, get on Instagram, use your hashtags, at Full Our Tweets, at ConserveCA, at LA Waterkeeper.
Yeah, they meet.
I don't know if RLF has one. Even Senator De Leon has a very active Twitter, and then LANLT for the LA Neighborhood Land Trust, and then Our Water LA. I know that's a lot, but you have to get your voices out there. I mean, it does matter. And so really quickly, because we haven't touched on the federal, and I know it seems like the federal side is a lost cause. It's not. The omnibus actually has fire funding in it. It has money for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and we're going to have a Water Resources Development Act coming up, and we're going to have the LA River in it. So you have to call your members of Congress and tell them, the LA River matters. I want money for the Army Corps to continue the LA River restoration. That money has to be in the Water Resources Development Act. Right now, we've got to reauthorize the Land and Water Conservation Fund. That money comes from offshore oil proceeds that belong to all of us, and it's not being fully funded. There are reasons for us to engage. Just make sure you do it. I can help you. The folks on this panel can help you. It's what we do every day, and we probably take it for granted that it's not easy. So we understand it's not easy. Come get help. And tweet.
Thank you so much. Let's just give all of them a round of applause. I think Thank you so much. And I think so. What I really want to do is get the dialogue going and start hearing questions from the public. I think there's a lot of really great opportunity. Unfortunately, so if you
there it goes.
Yeah, so you just gotta basically hold it. Yeah.
Hello.
There you go. So I'm just gonna anybody have a question? Just want to see a raise of hands if people have questions they'd like to ask on any particular issue, because I certainly have questions, but I don't want to take up the mic all by myself. So. Yes.
So at the beginning of the discussion, there was some talk about being able to convert existing land uses to open space. My question is, how would that be done? Would that be done via eminent domain, or how would that occur?
Let me approach it from the state or conservancy perspective. It's actually done through purchase and acquisition. And in Prop 68, for example, there is monies there available for purchase and acquisition too. To think about what's around us, if you look at the state parks, there's two pieces to the equation. I'll use the fact that we stand in the middle of two really amazing spaces. This is the LA State Historic Park in Chinatown and Rio de los Angeles, which is right up the street from us here. Both of those were part of a railway system. And going back, and I know there's probably a handful of people in the audience here that might have been back during the fights here. The one in Chinatown, for example, was proposed to be a warehouse district. And the community itself got together, organized, fought against it, years of effort to push back at it. And the state eventually purchased. But sometimes it comes from holding back projects and initiatives from the local level. And sometimes it takes creative pots of money to be able to access those kinds of things. Eminent domain is a tool that exists. It's rarely the tool that people like to utilize first. And oftentimes, I gotta be honest, I don't think I've seen it really be used for park space. I have seen it be used for transportation and for education, but I don't remember any incidences off the top of my head for park space. But I think the pathway in front of us is really acquisition. But at the same time, it gives an opportunity, especially when you look at the LA River, it gives us an opportunity to think about certain land uses and zoning that no longer need to be that way. Because I think in the past, we put our backs to the river, and now we're turning around and facing the river. And so you look at opportunity greenway spaces that no longer need to be industrially zoned, that should be some kind of other zoning that can be compatible with the LA River. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh.
Hi, I just want to say I'm in support of what you're doing, and I like the intent. I just want to feel like something is coming though, and I just happen to stumble upon this place in this transportation network that we have, which is mostly pavement all over the place. And I happen to work in the engineering field, and I know that a lot of my colleagues don't really think about green space. They think a lot about pavement. We go to school, we learn about pavement, but we don't really learn about green things, how to grow things, how to restore things. It's mostly about making an impact, paving things over, building bridges, which is necessary, but what part of this money is going to go towards educating people, young people like me, who actually want to do this but never had the opportunity to really learn about it early on? And also, I know that in architecture, I just read an article in the Los Angeles Times that architecture is one of the worst fields in terms of gender balance. And I know that a lot of times parks are designed by architects. So is there any part of this money that's going to go towards kind of fixing that issue and getting more women involved in planning parks and designing parks as architects, and people of color as well, because it's so important to have those different perspectives, and having people that are different than what we have had for many years designing these things. I think it would make a really big difference in how these places look and feel. And also, I really think there are a lot of opportunities with the existing transportation system to really like minimize what we have now and start to kind of, it's hard to say, but start like minimizing that instead of, year after year paying for maintenance and stuff like that. I hear all the time in my profession, like, how are we going to maintain these green elements? Where's the money for maintenance? But people don't say like, oh, we're already paying for the maintenance of pavement year after year, and we get more and more of it year after year. So how are we going to address all these issues?
Well, so I think there's
no, Alfredo, you just gotta hold it. It's a little loose. You just gotta hold it in.
So there's a lot in what you just said, but just some foundational stuff. Bonds pay for infrastructure. Taxes pay for things like infrastructure and other things like programs and staff. So this bond doesn't have resources to really address the kinds of issues that you're talking about. There's other ways to fund that. On top of that, something that I should have said at the beginning is there's never enough money. The need is in the hundreds of billions, and these bonds are at the 4 billion, 10 billion, like we're nowhere near what we need to maintain what we've got. So what I will say that is in this measure that sort of brings me a lot of confidence, that sort of goes to where you were going, is there are $60 million available in this measure that is dedicated exclusively to building low-cost serving overnight accommodations on public lands, state parks in particular on the coast. Because we passed a coastal act that says everybody deserves a right to the coast, and it's outrageously expensive to spend the night there these days. So that's something that's really going to be, it's going to change. It's going to address some of that youth education piece that you were describing. But there's the programs for what you're describing get funded through other measures.
So I've got a little, sorry, I was trying to hold too many things at once. I've got a little better news on the stormwater measure. And that is a tax. It is a parcel tax, so it can be used for broader things. So we are advocating, meaning the Our Water LA Coalition. It's no guarantee this is what makes it in the measure. We are advocating, first of all, 4% is set aside for job training. We envision that, I mean, it could go anywhere, but we envision that going both to community-based organizations, so things like LA Conservation Corps, as well as community colleges and other, LA Trade Tech, universities, to have that kind of training to get people used to green infrastructure. In terms of O&M, because it's a tax for the stormwater, it can actually fund O&M. We make it part of the requirements and the criteria we're recommending that shows a long-term O&M plan. And because, what was that?
Operations and maintenance.
Operations and maintenance. Sorry, yes, got too technical there. And one of the things, because a lot of even water projects in the past have been through bonds, like Prop O, which was an old stormwater fee in City of LA, that didn't allow for operation and maintenance. So these got built and now they're not being properly maintained. We're actually advocating that some of the money for the new tax can actually go for operations and maintenance. So it is a bigger problem that you're talking about. I totally agree with it. If you wanted to start like a green engineers, because the old saying, if all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and engineers often are sort of the worst examples of that. They love their desal plants and twin tunnels and not this nature-based stuff. So it's a longer term thing, but at least in the stormwater funding measure, if we get our way, some of that will be addressed.
I'm just going to add to that a little bit. The Nature Conservancy and other groups do have studies out on natural infrastructure and the benefits of natural infrastructure, the economic benefits and the community benefits, and how over time it's better. It's just better. And so we work with folks like the Army Corps of Engineers to really highlight the benefits of natural infrastructure. We have a national, memorandum of understanding with them and work with them when it's difficult for others sometimes to work with them. I also want to say that natural infrastructure, it's like anything else. It's going to come into the lexicon of engineers over time once we start using it more, once we start highlighting the projects, once they start seeing them in the ground, once they start growing up with those projects in their communities, when they see, I'm going to use a land trust project or a tree people project where they see, water infiltrating into the ground, or they see cisterns at their neighbors' houses, they'll understand that there are more options. And so it's been a slow process, but I think the other part is that landscape architects have to all be ecologists. They just have to study ecology in school too. And I know a few, and it really helps. So there are things that we can do and that are being done. It's just going to take some time.
Go ahead, Tom.
And welcome to Councilman Tom LeBlanc.
Well, thank you. It's nice to see everybody here. Give yourselves a hand. No better place to be on Thursday night. Yes, on 68. I thank the panel. I just want to say, if you learn the history of Los Angeles, in the 1930s, 90% of the people lived in homes. All people. There was very few apartments. And after the war, the build-up, the Wilshire Corridor, which is park poor, truly, from downtown out till about Normandy or Western. But the challenge is to get people to parks and health and the being that it's all about. I want to thank the Friends of the River, because it's so important. When I was a little child, when I hear the big horns, I thought there were ships coming up the river. But it was the trains at Taylor Yard and all that stuff. So it's a great opportunity to do what we do here. My first meetings were like you at these park meetings to start. And I do want to put a plug in for Elysian Park, because it's the most underloved park and needs more love. I hope they get reclaimed water in there to make it green. In 1980, there was a fire from Scott Road and Stadium Way all the way over. It took everything out and it's never been reforested yet. I'd love to see a bridge from the State Park to Elysian Park here. There's the greatest view in the town is right up on top of this hill. And the Dodgers did lose tonight, but they got 161 more games. But it's a struggle. I mean, you go to your offices and your elected officials, and Carrie will tell you, because she was a great deputy for Gloria Molina who fought for parks, is that you articulate what you want and what you need. And that's the only way to do it. The thing I don't like lately is we're losing some court cases where they close access, in areas. I want people to hike and get on the mountaintop. I hike every day, 6 o'clock at the observatory up to Mount Hollywood. And when you get to Mount Hollywood, and it's a clear day, you could see 4 national parks: Cleveland National Park, San Bernardino National Park, the Angeles, and Los Padres. And then you're in the National Recreation Area of Santa Monica, which is so important. But Raul, come up here. This is the guy we want to listen to, because this is the mentor, the coach, the one who changes lives. Have a blend of athletics for young men and women, young boys and girls. This is a great coach who has fought for more sports fields along the river area, which is so important. And you want to say something to everybody?
Well, this is the time, and I think today when I see all you guys here to really push for more parks. That's the best thing we can do. Then thank you very much for make everybody.
Thank you, Coach. Steve, it's been 3 years, I haven't seen a microphone, so you gotta take it away from me.
I just want to say that there's 720.
Yeah, you got it.
I'm fine. Okay, 725 million for park communities in Prop 68, just to put in a plug. And it's the largest investment in parks in California's history. And I know that it's been said, but we have to say it over and over again. And for those of you who have not endorsed, fill out a form before you leave, or do it at yes68ca.com. And tell your friends. Tell everybody you know.
Here's a question.
Yeah, we got a question right here.
Hello, my name is Alejandro Palomino from Elysian Valley. First of all, I would like to, for clarification, it's not the LA River, it's the LA River Flood Control Channel. It's not a river anymore, even though I don't like to call it a flood control channel, but that's what it is. So I was looking at this funding allocation for Prop 68. How many millions will be dedicated to protect, preserve, and enforce the 1916-18 Migratory Bird Treaty Act that protects endangered species that comes all the way from Alaska all the way to South America and all that. And also, how many millions will be dedicated to water quality studies? Because as far as we know, the water quality of the LA River flood control channels is poor, it's critical. I don't know why, some organizations and city elected officials are allowing people to do recreational activities such as kayaking, fishing, and all that, when they know for a fact that water quality is poor. It's very contaminated. And another thing is, if we, like the gentleman in the middle said that if we don't have enough money for what we have right now, why to build more if we know for a fact that we won't be able to do a proper to properly maintain all these new parks and all these projects? Thank you.
You gotta hold it in.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes. All right. Let me at least in terms of Prop 68, since I think the question was directed to Prop 68. There's $60 million dedicated to wildlife conservation funding. So it's a broad term, but any existing laws or treat, whatever has become codified in the state of California, the agency has the responsibility to maintain and deal with it. But additional monies are going to be allocated to the wildlife conservation efforts there. On top of that, and Bruce will probably cover the other parts of water quality, inside of Prop 68 there's essentially $200 million for multi-benefit flood and stormwater efforts. And so as we view the bond, it's essentially an infrastructure bond. We're going to be able to build, we're going to do some maintenance opportunities, but in terms of testing and in terms of the way it works, agencies are already doing that work. It's already their responsibility. This is an infrastructure component piece of it. And like I said, two parts of it will go specifically to wildlife and then stormwater. But in terms of the quality and all those kinds of things, that's why organizations like his is here and does work specifically in those areas.
Yeah, so again, there was a lot of depth in what you asked and a lot going on. So the first thing in terms of why should we build more, and I think that was more toward the parks and Prop 68 than the stormwater funding measure, but these are all critical. And yes, we need to invest in the long-term maintenance. I think part of the hope is because we have in the last few years invested a lot, whether it be in housing through H and HHH and the parks measure, M, hopefully a stormwater fee, hopefully 68, this money can all be leveraged, and there's a lot of other kinds of dollars going in and other types of investments. So if we can do a really good job, and it's hard, but if we can put all these pots of funding together, because frankly, the kinds of projects we're talking about in the stormwater funding measure are the same kind of projects we're talking about in 68. It's parks, it's greening schools, greening homes, greening our streets, and so these dollars should be able to be leveraged. And so instead of the $300 million a year, it's $600 million or $1 billion a year. In terms of the water quality, to me, there's sort of two parts to the question. One is we have to do more to protect the water quality and restore the water quality of the LA River, and that's what LA Waterkeeper does through enforcement actions against industrial polluters. That's what the stormwater funding measure is. One thing I didn't mention earlier and how you sort of connect the stormwater measure with the LA River is, when there were big storms, last year when we had the 1 week of massive storms, 25 billion gallons of runoff went down the LA River. That, if we captured all of it, we would never capture all of it. If we captured all of it, that could be 5% of the county's water portfolio for the year. If we are ever going to look at the river as somewhat of a natural system along all 51 miles and try to pull some of the concrete, and we know it's not going to get to a natural system, we're going to have to not allow 25 billion gallons of water to come off of our streets and roads and storm drains. We're going to have to go in and do these micro projects, these parcel scale, these neighborhood scales to capture and treat water on site. All that being said, I won't even talk about the LA River, a weakening of standards, and we're suing this guy over it. Because I think one of the things our agencies are trying to do is say, oh, if we just weaken standards enough, then the river water becomes clean. No, the water is still dirty, we've just weakened standards. I'm sorry, my little plug. On a case that'll be decided very soon. But the other thing that I want to access issue, and at least for Waterkeeper, I won't speak for any other group, and there obviously is contamination, and I think we're kind of coming to grips with it, is our feeling is we believe in right to know, but not limited access. And that's the same thing that happened with beach water quality when we start posting beaches. We don't close things off unless you absolutely have to, unless it's absolutely a public health threat with like a raw sewage spill. But you let folks know you are putting yourself at risk if you go out after a storm or near a storm drain or you have a posting. And that's kind of our feeling with the LA River. Make sure everybody knows, but unless you know it's a really severe public health threat, you allow access. And that's kind of where we're coming from.
Try to get this back out to everyone. That help at all?
Yes.
We'll see.
Lovely taping them.
I have a question on the flooding part of the bill itself, or the proposition now. I think there's a couple $100 million for flood, and traditionally that goes to Northern California. Are you committing some to Southern California? Because we have compromised levees and maintenance and operational issues that have potentially put a special hazards area in the Glendale Narrows.
Sure. The Glendale Narrows actually gets its own particular funding. There's a $20 million allocation for the Glendale. Yes, it does.
Okay.
It's not exactly, but it was actually one of the, when we talk about sort of the omnibus nature of this effort, Glendale actually had a specific piece in there. So there's, is it 20? I think 20 off the top of my head. It's 20. 20 for Glendale.
For flood?
Well, it's for the projects that Glendale had requested as priority projects. I don't know where the levy fits in exactly.
Sorry, can you just clarify, is that Glendale, City of Glendale or Glendale Narrows?
It's for the bridge. I thought it was Laura Freeman's bridge.
It's not necessarily, is it the bridge?
Yeah.
Okay, then, so the Glendale's got a piece that's specifically allocated. If it was the bridge, I have to go back and remember because it was part of the debate here. In terms of the $200 million, it's not dedicated anywhere in particular. It's actually to the department to assess highest level priorities. And certainly levies is part of that effort for flood control. So if it ranks as high in the priority within the department, it will receive monies, but it's a general line item to cover those areas. So yes, it would absolutely be eligible for funding in this proposition.
Can you clarify?
It's not an earmark.
The department that ranks funding in this case would be the Army Corps of Engineers?
No.
Who's ranking the funding, shall we do?
Well, all of this money, Prop 68 has 2 state agencies. So it'll become, I believe this pot will be coming through the Department of
Natural Resources.
In Natural Resources in one of their subdivisions, so.
Water conservation.
Yeah, so, I mean, the state is organized differently than the federal government, but our Secretary of Resources, John Laird right now, whoever it'll be with the next governor, will probably have a hand in determining where it goes exactly, but I believe that's where it's at. If I can give you my card afterwards, if you're really interested, we can track down exactly where it is. So.
Okay, thank you.
So, just a quick question, a comment that sort of, earlier I was thinking, we, right now, and something I feel I can say with full confidence, owe a debt of gratitude to our state legislators, because they really stepped up, and by that I don't mean the entire state, I mean the Southern California, and in particular the LA region. Because this measure, if you really tease out what the people of Los Angeles will get, it disproportionately benefits, because what you heard earlier about the lack of parks, as well as the LA River. I mean, a lot of the language in here that's, if you go through the bill, it's pretty convoluted, it's got a lot of stuff, but you could see interesting things in there where the language is such that LA River has ability to compete for those dollars, even though there's like an urban and river streams program, independent of the dollars that are going to go to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, that within that conservancy are dedicated to the Los Angeles River. So it's just to say that historically, Northern California had the leadership to advance policy and the agendas on the environment, and we're seeing a disproportionate balance now, a great one, because it's a proportionate when you think about population, absolutely, it's a deficiency actually. Exactly, an equity balance in what we're seeing, and so it's just sort of a nuance that you guys should sort of pay attention to, because it's really unique.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that there's actually a pot of funding that's for,
there's a pot of funding that's for areas with more than 200,000 people. You can imagine that that's where LA is eligible.
There's
another one for a region that's passed parks measure already. We have. I mean, I think there are clear places like